Coffee shop terror. A 16-hour standoff in an Australian coffee shop leaves 2 dead. Joy to the world. A smiling Pope Francis stresses joy is the mark of saints. Pioneer remembered. A pro-life professor who helped build a culture of life in America has passed. And following Francis, a new app keeps us connected with the Pope on his January trip to the Philippines. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Monday, December 15th, 2014. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. Investigators in Australia are trying to determine what motivated an Iranian man to hold hostage in a Sydney coffee shop for 16 hours. Wyatt Goolsby is here tonight with more. Wyatt?
Brian, police in Sydney say 2 hostages are dead, as well as the lone gunman himself. In addition, 1 police officer and several other hostages were injured. A total of 17 were accounted for. But aside from the physical wounds, the attack today shocked millions as it paralyzed Australia's most populous city for hours. The standoff ended when several hostages ran out of the Lindt Chocolate Cafe and police stormed the building. The scene played out on national TV. The crisis started Monday morning in Sydney's downtown business district when the suspected lone gunman, a self-styled Muslim cleric, Manharon Munis, took over the shop full of customers getting their morning coffee. Some customers were forced to stand against the window. 2 had to hold a black Islamic State flag. Local leaders said the events would not disrupt life in the country.
Australia is a peaceful, open and generous society. Nothing should ever change that. And that's why I would urge all Australians today to go about their business as usual.
In the middle of the standoff, 5 people made a dramatic escape. The rest were freed when police stormed the building later that night.
This was an isolated incident. It is an isolated incident.
Police say the Iranian-born Munis was known to them.
This pen is my gun, and these words are my bullets.
He was charged with being an accessory to murder his ex-wife and convicted of writing offensive letters to families of Australian soldiers killed in Afghanistan. Police in Australia had warned authorities of potential terrorist attacks back in September after multiple anti-terror raids. Dakota Wood with the Heritage Foundation says the standoff shows Australia, like the rest of the world, is not immune to terrorism in any form.
It seems to me it's just indicative that if somebody is motivated for whatever reason to prosecute an attack, that in a free society those opportunities will always occur, much like criminality is.
And because terrorism is everywhere, Wood says it is important that law enforcement and intelligence officials work together closely, as they have in Australia. In addition, the Archbishop of Sydney today also called for prayers for police, hostages, and their families. He also reminded citizens not to turn on one another.
And now, some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. President Obama traveled to a New Jersey military base today to visit with troops and their families.
I thank you as your president because you inspire me, and of all the privileges I have in serving in this office, nothing comes close to the honor of serving as your commander-in-chief.
The president speaking today at the Joint Base McGuire-Dix Lakehurst. A quarter of those serving in the U.S. military are Catholics. Our chief White House correspondent Suzanne LaFranchi tells us about the special chaplains who serve as their pastors.
Brian, whether in a tent in Iraq, aboard an aircraft carrier at sea, or ministering to the wounded at the VA, chaplains from the Archdiocese for the Military Services have been providing pastoral care since World War I. Today, Monsignor John Foster told me about the work the dedicated priests do.
Our chaplains serve anywhere that our armed forces are deployed, whether that be on a ship at sea, whether that be at a base in Afghanistan, or even a base here in the United States. They basically do the same thing that parish priests do around the world. They celebrate Mass every day, they hear confessions, they celebrate baptisms, they would preside at weddings and do the preparation that would precede the wedding, and they do a lot of pastoral counseling.
But instead of a small parish, theirs is more worldwide, right?
Oh yeah, our chaplains go anywhere that the United States Armed Forces goes. And we not only work with the actual active duty service members, but we also take care of their dependents, so their family members who are at home who would still worship at our military installations.
And you told me 25% of the military are Catholic? 25%
of the U.S. military is Catholic, yet only 8% of the chaplain corps of the branches of the service are made up of Catholic priests. So you can see we have a great need for more Catholic chaplains.
And they are actually go through the rigorous training.
Yes, they are actually members of the U.S. military. They are officers in the U.S. military, and they are government employees.
It seems as though they have a very challenging job.
They do, especially those who are deployed, because oftentimes they may be one of the only Catholic chaplains in that area. And so, though, for example, in Afghanistan, they would be moving from forward base to forward base, sometimes only spending an hour, hour and a half at each one.
And you said you don't rely on any government money?
That's true. We are completely funded by the generosity of the people of God in the United States. We get no government funding whatsoever.
Is it hard to get chaplains?
It is. Obviously, there's a shortage of priests throughout the United States, but we really need to do what we can to encourage young priests especially to look into serving in the chaplain corps. Even just for a period of time, 3 years. It doesn't have to be a whole career. But we'd like to give so that our men and women here who go abroad to serve in the military can have the same pastoral care that they get at home.
All right. Thank you so much, Father.
Thank you.
The chaplain's work is daunting. The roughly 500 priests minister to 1.8 million Catholics. The chaplains provide the spiritual and emotional strength the soldiers and their families need in the difficult work of protecting our freedom. Brian.
All right, Suzanne, important work, and thank you so much. The Supreme Court decides it will not review a case challenging an Arizona law designed to curb abortions. That means an appeals court injunction putting the law on hold remains in effect for now. The law would make it tougher for clinics to provide abortion-inducing drugs to women. It would tighten the window when those drugs could be administered from 9 weeks to 7 weeks following the onset of pregnancy. Carol Tobias, president of National Right to Life, told EWTN News Nightly, whether or not the pills are prescribed in a manner consistent with FDA protocols, a chemical abortion is a dangerous procedure. Tobias calls the FDA-approved drugs painful and dangerous, even though abortion providers insist they're safe. The threat of a government shutdown may be over for most of 2015. The $1.1 trillion spending bill was passed in the Senate late Saturday night. The vote was close, 56-40 after the House passed it, 219-206. Democrats got continued funding for Obamacare and money for the president's challenged immigration policies. Republicans locked in provisions to prevent the use of federal funds to pay for abortions, as well as billions in spending cuts. The president is expected to sign the bill to keep the government operating. The Vatican's Secretary of State meets with U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry at the Vatican today. Cardinal Pietro Parolin and Secretary Kerry discussed tensions in the Middle East, the Holy See emphasizing the need for humanitarian solutions for Guantanamo Bay inmates. The short time in the meeting didn't allow for in-depth discussions on Ukraine or the Ebola outbreak. Pope Francis calls for courageous, truthful Catholic communication that opens dialogue and speaks to the whole person. The Holy Father held a special audience today with the television broadcaster for the Italian Bishops' Conference. Pope Francis points out that Catholic media has a challenging mission to safeguard communication from everything that deforms it. Francis says Catholic journalists need to avoid sensationalism and to speak to people's minds and their hearts. And Pope Francis encourages us to be joyful this Advent season. He celebrated Gaudete Sunday in a Roman parish over the weekend. He called it the Sunday of joy, saying saints have a cheerful, happy face, not a sad one. The Holy Father arrived early to meet with children and sick members of the parish and to hear confessions. Earlier, the Pope greeted crowds gathered in St. Peter's Square for his Sunday Angelus. About 50,000 people came, including many children holding figurines of baby Jesus. Francis blessed them for nativity scenes at home or school. This is a custom in Italy. They call the baby Jesus Bambinello Gesù. The Pope also gave the kids a pop quiz.
La gioia senza Gesù. C'è la gioia? No, bravi.
Without Jesus, is there joy? No. Good answer, he told them. The Pope told the children prayer is the breath of the soul. He also surprised everyone with the gift of a pocket prayer book. Coming up, as we mark the second anniversary of the Sandy Hook tragedy, we talk with a priest helping the community to heal. And Pope Francis calls on the blind to live life without fear or isolation. On Monday, December the 15th, in this third week of Advent, just 10 days before Christmas, I'm Brian Patrick. Thanks for joining us. The families of 9 people killed at Sandy Hook Elementary School 2 years ago are suing the manufacturer of the rifle used in that shooting. The negligence and wrongful death lawsuit asserts the gun was designed for military use, that it should have not been sold publicly. The other defendants are a firearms distributor and the store where that rifle was purchased. This lawsuit comes 2 years after the Sandy Hook tragedy. December 14th, 2012, a 20-year-old man shot and killed his mother before going to the school and killing 20 children and 6 educators at Sandy Hook. Catherine Zeltner spoke earlier today with the pastor of the Newtown Catholic Parish about the healing process.
We're joined by Monsignor Robert Weiss, the pastor of St. Rose of Lima Catholic Church in Newtown, Connecticut. Monsignor Weiss was at the scene of the shooting to bless the victims. Monsignor, how is the Newtown community healing today?
You know, I think that's a very difficult answer for me to give because we're all in very different places. You know, for certainly the most impacted members of our community, every day is 1214, and they live it every day. Others are desperately trying to move ahead with their lives. But I will say, for example, yesterday was a real mix of tears and hugs and support. The emotion is still very heavy in this community, and healing is really a process into which we are entering.
9 of the 26 victims were your parishioners. What impact did the tragedy have on young people in the parish?
You know, I saw different reactions from different age groups. Certainly the younger children are afraid. But as we got more and more into the middle school age and the junior high age, they were asking the really difficult questions, and they're still asking the difficult questions. You know, why does God allow things like this to happen? If God is so good, how can evil have so much power? And that we're finding our high school students are coming at it from another different angle as well. We had a adoration last night, which was extremely well attended by our young people. And again, you see the apprehension, the fears that, you know, we all live on the edge here. You're never quite sure what each day is going to bring to us. So certainly the adolescents are struggling at their level, the preteens are struggling at theirs, and the younger children at theirs. We're really trying to understand where they're coming from. You know, we still have a number of our younger children who aren't sleeping, who aren't eating correctly, who are staying very tight with their family members. So it's a very difficult kind of ministry to develop, and yet it's something that we have to pay great attention to.
When there is so much grief and mourning, as a pastor, how do you comfort the families?
You know, we're simply making ourselves as available as we can for anyone who needs help. We certainly have been supportive of professional services, and many of our programs and ministries have been reoriented towards helping families, helping couples, helping children, you know, really discuss the issues that they're facing. This trauma obviously surfaced many other traumas in people's lives, and when the professionals came to us when this first happened, they told us that we would have issues in marriage and marriage disruption. There would be an increase of drug and alcohol use. And we are seeing that within the community. And so we're trying to provide a lot of programming to help people stay healthy in the midst of all this. In addition to the professional counselors, we're all working together. We're all taking courses. We're trying to develop programs that will help people speak. You know, if they would just talk about it and open up, we'd be able to help them so much more. But it is a challenge because, as I say, everyone is pretty much in a very different place. One day could be a great, happy day. The next day you could be at the bottom of the pit. So it is taking a long time, and it certainly is a process.
Monsignor, if you can, what signs of hope do you see in Newtown today?
You know, I want to say thanks, first of all, for the continued support. We were all amazed on the second anniversary how many people were in touch with us again from all across the world. That prayerful support, that fact that they're not forgetting us, is probably one of the greatest signs of hope we have. Also, we're seeing the most impacted families, many of them doing wonderful things in the name of their children, developing programs and providing scholarships and speaking in public about gun violence. I'm so impressed that they're finding the energy within themselves to honor their children. And so we do see those kinds of signs. We're also seeing people still saying thank you. You know, when you go somewhere, there's still a hug. And it means a great deal to us within the community that we have that support from within. So there are many signs of hope that surround us, but this tragedy still looms large in the hearts of all of us.
Monsignor Weiss, thank you for joining us today as we continue to keep the community in our prayers.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Catherine. And Pope Francis is encouraging the blind and visually impaired to live without fear or isolation, like St. Lucy. The Holy Father spoke with the Italian Union of Blind and Visually Impaired on Saturday, St. Lucy's feast day. She is the patroness of the blind and visually impaired. Lucy means light, and Pope Francis says we become a light when we are a gift to others. He said St. Lucy recognized her value and lived courageously. He encouraged his audience not to take on an attitude of victimization. Cardinal Peter Turkson will bring a message of hope and solidarity to regions of West Africa ravaged by Ebola. The Ghana native visits Sierra Leone tomorrow and Liberia on Thursday. He's accompanied by the Special Advisor on Health for the Catholic Relief Agency Caritas. Cardinal Turkson stresses the need to help priests and others who attend to the spiritual needs of Ebola victims and their families. He says we must treat the whole person and not just their bodies. A prominent Catholic theologian who played a pivotal role in the pro-life movement has died. Jason Calvi remembers Dr. William May.
Dr. William E. May worked with popes, taught thousands of students at Catholic University of America and the John Paul II Institute in D.C., and he wrote more than a dozen books.
To read Catholic Bioethics and the Gift of Human Life is really a eureka experience, if you will.
Jennifer Kimball Watson of the Culture of Life Foundation read Dr. May and then took a class with him in Rome.
He wouldn't give things, what you don't do, but look at what the beauty is of the human person, of bioethics, of not contracepting in marriage. And it really resonated to the extent that I thought this is exactly what our world, our culture needs.
And May passed on that teaching to other pro-life figures like law professor Helen Alvarez and the National Catholic Bioethics Center's Dr. John Haas. Father Basil Cole remembers his many conversations and lunches with his friend.
It was like enthusiasm. It was always enthusiasm.
Pope Paul VI released his document on human life and contraception in 1968. May was originally opposed.
About 500 theologians wrote a letter of dissent on the matter, and he signed it. And then a few months later, he asked to be taken off. He realized he was in error.
And for the rest of his life, the member of Opus Dei defended the Church's teaching. The good-humored father of 7 and grandfather of 16 died this weekend. Dr. William E. May was 86 years old. And Dr. May's wife tells me he died exactly 57 years after they first met. The funeral is Saturday. One of Dr. May's students, Father Joe Rogers, says May was an exceptional, passionate teacher who believed if he put forward the truth, it could convince, Brian, the human heart.
What an incredible, inspirational story.
Wish I would have been able to meet him myself.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. Up next, we explore the Holy See's stance on nuclear ethics, and we'll show you the new papal app for following the Pope's trip to the Philippines. Pope Francis celebrated the 45th anniversary of his priestly ordination Saturday. Vatican Communications sent out a tweet with a great photo of a young Father Jorge Bergoglio at his 1969 ordination. Thanks for joining us on this Monday, December the 15th. I'm Brian Patrick. Dr. Marianne Cusimano-Love is an advisor to the U.S. Catholic Bishop's Office of Justice and Peace on nuclear ethics. And the U.S. resumed bilateral nuclear talks with Iran. They failed to meet that November deadline. What is at stake in these talks?
Basically, there are a number of talks underway. One is the talks with the Iranians to try to make sure that the Iranians will not possess in the future the ability to have nuclear weapons. Right now they have fissile material for nuclear energy, and what's at issue there is that they not be able to develop bomb-grade material. So those are those discussions. But there are other discussions as well. The Non-Proliferation Treaty is up for renewal this year, so there's meetings about that. And they just had meetings last week in Vienna about the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons. So these are a number of meetings concerning U.S. nuclear policy.
What is the Catholic teaching or perspective on nuclear weaponry?
The Catholic Church has always been against nuclear weapons and in favor of the abolition, the complete abolition of nuclear weapons, for a number of reasons. These do not meet just war criteria. A nuclear war could never be a just war. Nuclear weapons don't discriminate between children and non-combatants and soldiers. They're not proportional. So there's a whole host of Catholic teaching that leads us to the position that these weapons are never permissible. And what's changed in the meetings last week in Vienna was the Church had said during the Cold War that deterrence could be a provisionally temporal exception on the way to deeper levels of disarmament. But that was 50 years ago. Mm-hmm. And so the Church is saying, you know, there's some people who are kind of hung up on deterrence as a permanent condition rather than just a stepping stone to deeper disarmament. And let's return to the bigger picture of moving towards deeper levels of disarmament.
So deterrence is no longer seen as it was 50 years ago. Do you foresee the Church under the leadership of Pope Francis taking a more vocal and active role in trying to eliminate nuclear weapons from the face of the earth?
The Church has a proud history here. I mean, the Church has played really pivotal moments in terms of the Cuban Missile Crisis at the height of the Cold War. St. John the 23rd helped broker backdoor negotiations between Kennedy and Khrushchev to bring the whole world back from the nuclear precipice. And also the activism of the Catholic Church and the voice of the Catholic Church under St. John Paul II also helped bring us to very deeper levels of disarmament at a time when people thought it couldn't be done. So we've got a rich history here, and Francis is trying to remind us of that we can continue to move forward. We've had great progress from the Cold War height when there were nearly 70,000 nuclear weapons. We've had 75% reduction, so that's the good news. But what Francis is telling us is 75% reduction isn't zero, and we still need to keep up the effort across the Church to move towards a more peaceful world without nuclear weapons.
You met recently with the Archbishop Tomasi. He is, of course, the permanent observer of the Holy See for the United Nations. What are the current threats that the Holy See is really focused on?
The concerns are that nuclear weapons today are not like they were during the Cold War. Then the concerns for proliferation were a number of countries, governments of countries might get those weapons, and that concern continues, as you mentioned, with our talks with the Iranians. But the concern today is that non-state actors and terrorist groups may try to acquire not only nuclear weapons, but just some level of nuclear materials that they could explode in a dirty bomb or a radiological dispersal device. Now, this isn't just the stuff of bad action movies. Unfortunately, ISIL seized about 80 pounds of uranium from Mosul University in Iraq over the summer. Some ISIL-related groups are claiming that they have the capacity for a dirty bomb. And of course, drones provide the delivery vehicle that you don't need to have an intercontinental ballistic missile, for example, or an air force to be able to deliver nuclear devices today. So this changes the background context, and it's why the Church is continuing to say, look, zero is the only safe number here to keep people safe and human life in the planet.
It makes sense. Dr. Marianne Cusimano-Love, we appreciate your insight and certainly giving us a better idea of where the Church stands with this.
Thank you, Brian.
Thanks for being with us. Well, one dictionary giant has released its 2014 Word of the Year. This year, it's culture. Merriam-Webster says it's based on a spike in interest in the word and searches on its website, specifically consumer culture, culture of transparency, and workplace culture. Nostalgia is number 2, given this year's 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights Movement, the British invasion, and other 1964 events. Well, we can now follow the Holy Father's January visit to the Philippines with the official app, which is now live. Papal Visit PH links to the Pope's Twitter account, includes his itinerary and the official theme song, We Are All God's Children. The app also offers a prayer wall where we can post our prayers. You can download it for free on both iOS and Android devices. Pope Francis arrives in the Philippines January 15th for a 4-day visit. Our EWTN News Nightly team will travel with the Holy Father. Until tomorrow, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, watch again on YouTube. For all of us at EWTN News Nightly, I'm Brian Patrick. We leave you with a couple of snapshots from the Pope's audience with Roman Catholic broadcasters. Good night, and may God bless you.